We need to get subscribed and get this unity stronger and beat YouTube at their own game. Okay, that's what this is about. Like I say, go to the remix button, hit the remix button. That way you'll have this video and keep up with this. Otherwise, you know, YouTube's just going to control us, guys, and it's really bad.
Were we better then, with our backs against the wall? Were we better men than we'd ever been before?
Well, hi, welcome to another program in our series on, it started focusing on Islamophobia, and we've expanded to examining the atrocities and the lies of the American and neoliberal empire in general. And up to now, I've asked the audience to empathize with America's crimes against other people and Israel's crimes against other people. The Iraqis, the Afghanis, the Pakistanis, the Palestinians. This program is going to be a little bit painful to do and a little bit painful to watch, I'm afraid, because this is going to be about the American and neoliberal atrocities against our own people and against people specifically right here in the Northwest. I'm talking about the nuclear meltdown at Fukushima. And we have with us tonight a guest, Kevin Blanch, who is a probable victim of nuclear experimentation himself. His father was a Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton in Southern California during the Korean War, who was one of 40,000 troops used as experimental guinea pigs to test the effects of nuclear radiation. And his father died of AML leukemia as a direct result of this, and Kevin now has exactly the same disease, which is arguably related through inherited mutations, gene mutations. And he's been fighting this for some time now. And this has motivated him. He's not a passive man. He's motivated to really dig into this and drag out the truth, however well hidden it is. And he's, among other things, he's really investigated what's happened at Fukushima and what has happened and hasn't happened since then. So let's turn to Kevin. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, let's get right to it here. What happened at Fukushima 2 years ago? This, incidentally, is being recorded on the anniversary of the Fukushima meltdown.
Well, when the Fukushima, so many of us as anti-nuclear who know this thesis have been expecting something like this. When the earthquake happened over there, we know that none of these nuclear generators, including the 104 in the United States, can sustain a 7.5 earthquake, let alone one of this magnitude. So what happened when the earthquake, everybody misconceives that it was all about the tsunami. The cores fractured in 1, 2, and 3 at Fukushima on impact, on the shake, and that containment madness was let into the atmosphere immediately. And then, of course, the tsunami come in and swapped the generators out to cool the pools, and then number 4's cooling pool went dry.
Okay, let me stop you for a second. So I think most of the audience probably doesn't know how Fukushima is structured. As I understand it, there's 4 reactors that were kind of the front line, and then 2 more behind that, right? Right. And the front 4 took the biggest hit.
Right.
And reactors 1, 2, and 3 were destroyed. They exploded.
Yes.
And those, the nuclear material release has now been penetrating through the concrete flooring.
A lot of people call that China syndrome, which really is nuclear fission.
Yeah.
Which that is exactly what's happening over there.
And it's leaching into the soil and the groundwater beneath the reactor.
Well, Fukushima, a lot of people need to remember that the wind was blowing out when it happened. So that plume hit Canada in the northwest more than it did in Japan by many, many, many times. So they made the IAEA, TEPCO, they made the decision to dump water on it. It's either let it plume into the air, which the low-level steam, as people, it's not steam, it's not pollution, it's nuclear fallout. They made the decision to push it into the Pacific Ocean, the big dumping ground. So for 730 some odd days, it's basically had water dumped on it. People compare it to a tea bag, but it's much more than a tea bag, because the tea bag gets stronger and stronger. Gamma rays, it's nuclear fission is going on, so it's just continually been pushed into the Pacific Ocean.
Now, is this the same water that was being used to cool the reactor? They're pumping it through the debris?
No, they run out of water, so they made the decision to use seawater, and so they were pumping seawater. You remember the early days, they had the helicopters driving in. They have no answer. You know, TEPCO's own words themselves were relying on yet developed technology to handle this. So it was kind of make it up as you go, which we've been lied to the entire time. By law, they had to have international law. Yeah. So they used seawater to dump on it, which they're still doing.
So they're pumping it through.
Yes.
So it's coming out on the other side, or it's being released as steam into the atmosphere, right?
All of it. You know, people have this assumption they're capturing the water. There's some kind of bladder system there, and they're capturing it because they talk about their tanks and their water, which, by the way, they've been dumping since April 3rd that I reported, April 3rd in a dramatic way of 2011. Behind everybody's backs, they've been just dumping the tank water into the Pacific. People talk about they're going to do it. They've been doing it.
And the purpose of that is just to cool the reactor and diffuse the heat and diffuse the radiation.
Well,
it is diffusing the radiation into the water.
All it is it's to push it off on the Pacific Ocean instead of off the people of Japan. It's really nothing more than that. It's no different than steam. It's just in that ecosystem versus this ecosystem. It's that simple. It's 3 full core meltdowns. You know, Chernobyl was 1.
And I understand that Chernobyl was even only operating at about half capacity.
Right.
And these 3 at Fukushima were operating at full capacity. So that's basically about 6 times the radiation.
Not to mention the dry spent fuel pools in number 4. People talk about.
So let's get to number 4 now. Number 4 was not totally destroyed, but was on fire, and it's still burning.
Yes.
2 years later, it's still burning. And the roof was blown off of it.
Right.
So the radiation from these spent fuel pools is now being released into the atmosphere.
Yes, and they went dry. I think a lot of people in America all over don't realize that all the spent fuel waste on these monsters are stored on site. Well, number 4, everybody was like, why is there so much waste in there? You know, and we've exposed that. Beyond Nuclear says it better than anyone, talking about the connection with the CIA and the nuclear weapons industry.
Yeah.
That's why so much. Well, they went dry. When they go dry, nuclear fission takes place. They melt together, and gamma rays are released into the atmosphere. So it's been released in the atmosphere. And you know, people are saying, we have another earthquake, which is true. It's true. If we have another earthquake, it's sinking. And if it does collapse, Helen Candicott says, I will evacuate my family out of Boston. Well, so much of it has already been released. And RadNet is supposed to be here to detect and protect.
Now these spent fuel rods are just stacked.
Yes.
On like warehouse shelving.
They lay on it, just lay on a warehouse shelf, which none of these reactors, none of them, the 104, were ever intended. It's just a shell game because in the early days they promised to build Yucca Mountain. It was going to go on Yucca Mountain. You know, we built Yucca Mountain, which was not the greatest of ideas anyway. There are no good ideas. The nuclear waste is it's all a problem.
At Fukushima, it was just piling up on site.
That's what they're all doing here too. Yes. Yeah. They just sit them in pools on shelves, and they have to stay cool. If the water goes off them, they fuse together, and it's on. You know, it's released there. There's really not a containment vessel like there is the reactor itself.
Yeah.
It's madness. It is total madness.
Yeah. And this was a General Electric Mark I model reactor, which I understand was identified 40 years ago by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as inadequate in terms of its containment capacity. And I know what I read was one of the things it needs is basically a release system the pressure is building up in there when there's a meltdown like this. It's getting hotter and hotter, the pressure is building, and in order to release it, it has to have a valve basically to release it into the atmosphere without the radiation being released, right?
Right.
So they have to have a filter system there. And they have refused to install that because of cost.
Yes, they've done nothing because of cost, but even if they did have a filter system, it still wouldn't have made, you know, it might have trapped a little bit, but
yeah,
it's just, I mean, the whole thing is just a dog and pony show as far as filter systems go. Doesn't matter if the lid blows off or it filters out. In the atmosphere is in the atmosphere. The half-life plutonium is 24,500 years.
Yeah.
It's insanity. It is.
Which is, maybe you could explain what half-life is to the audience in case they...
Half-life on, well, as we know, plutonium is the evil of the evil. We have cesium-134, cesium-137, which are nasty, nasty evil killers. One is man-made, the other can occur naturally in the environment at a very low level. But the half-life on cesium is, you know, 2 years on 134, or excuse me, 137, and then 20 years. Plutonium, 24,500 years. That's without moxie. Half-life means, as this time frame, as it depletes and the atmosphere eats it away and takes care of it, halfway, just what the word says. Yeah. So in reality, I mean, I just tell people, my students when I talk, it's basically forever.
It is forever.
Yeah, 24,005 years, half, so 50,000 years till...
Now, is cesium and kind of an artificial product of this process?
Yes.
It doesn't occur in nature.
Now, 134 does, but 137 does not, or vice versa. I get them confused. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
I'm a socioeconomist.
Well,
134 and 131 that occurs naturally in low levels, but the other does not, and that's why the tracer studies that came out of the tuna in 2011 were a big, big deal, and the Oceanic Institute of who did theirs are showing it early, because one is totally 100% man-made, and so we know. Yeah. And if there's cesium, there's plutonium.
You know where it came from, yeah.
And if there's plutonium, we know that incidence of cancers are going to rise dramatically in direct correlation. You know, people argue with me all the time, say, "Oh, this data's not in there." I'm like, yes, the data is. It's over and over done. The data, government data over the 40,000 Marines, the Chernobyl data, their study.
They've been gathering it ever since 45.
Yeah. Yes, and it's there. It's hiding in plain sight.
Now, you use the word MOX or MOXIE. Could you explain that?
Well, what the nuclear industry, which is the military madness complex, I call it the fake radical Christian industrialist complex, they work in symphony. The nuclear weapons industry is the nuclear energy industry.
Yeah, I know. We're going to talk about that in a little while.
But anyway, the MOXIE, the fuel, is to turn it into weapons grade. And it's a process that goes through that makes it much, much more stronger.
So that's highly refined uranium.
Highly refined uranium.
Okay. Yeah. Now, and was that in the containment vessels in
number 4?
Number 4, yeah, which is now being released into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Not yet into the ocean until this collapses.
Well,
but if it collapses.
Well, if it collapses, there's so much of it there, and their cooling process by spraying water on top of it has, you know, kept some of them. You know, that it's debatable. We really don't know for sure. But, you know, the people that are really, and we're relying on grassroots investigators because everything's covered up. We really don't know how much of it has been released into the atmosphere. Yeah. That's the problem.
Well, there was, I think, 1,535 nuclear assemblies there in,
which is a staggering
in building
number.
4.
Yeah, gargantuous
over
number.
1,500 spent fuel assemblies in these cooling pools.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well that's encouraging news, isn't it? Yeah. So let's now talk about the diffusion of this. It's not just staying in Japan.
Well, I talk about this all the time, and I have from day one. You have to remember, when this happened, the wind was blowing out. The wind was blowing directly out over the Pacific, which it blew out for 7 days. The IAEA and TEPCO and Westinghouse, General Electric, the entire evil complex, they made the decision on day 3 or 4, which the NRC's tapes themselves, which I have them, by the way.
That's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yes, and when this dog and pony show was going on CNN, on Fox News, and they had this character, this Jim Walsh, who was nothing but a propagandist, and Sanjay Gupta pulled his, as I've turned black and yellow journalism. which is not even failure to report or FEMAR. It's the intentional downplaying. When they started this whole thing, everybody was debating, how bad is it, how bad is it? Well, I knew how bad it was, so I was going crazy on my YouTube, using real radical language, trying to call attention. Well, we know via the NRC's tape system, because they're public record. So I've listened to them. The NRC, their group, are phone calling. Day 3, the NRC's conversations to each other. We know this is 3 full court, completely meltdowns that is into the atmosphere. And so it was blowing out, and then they made the decision to push it into the Pacific. So the Northwest, Canada, where the jet stream was over, this will kill many, many more people by many thousands of times in North America than it will ever kill in Japan.
Well, I think they're estimating there are already 14,000 deaths attributable in North America.
Well, we know factually already that leukemia rates, the data we're getting, now I haven't seen the data of Oregon, but people have talked to me the last several days while I've been here in Eugene. But I know that the numbers that I've seen coming out of California and or Washington are increased rates in AML. And people need to be not confuse chronic leukemia with AML leukemia. Very different diseases. And AML leukemia is a horrific, evil killer, which is in my body. It's a miracle that I'm alive.
And that's attributable to radiation exposure.
Absolutely, 100%. We know in factual detail that exposure to nuclear fallout, Richard Miller's work in 1986 Under the Cloud is so perfect. It's so by the way, Carol Gallagher is alive and well in Colorado with her book American Ground to Zero. She called it to a T then. This data all exists. We know that exposure to nuclear fallout mutates inside the bone marrow, and thyroid cancer in the early days. Mutations in babies are the early signs, but the bigger evil later that can develop at any time is AML leukemia. The correlation is perfectly correlated, and that disease
doesn't come from any other source.
Well, we know that exposure to benzene and things like that, but yes, but we know that the numbers dramatically increase.
Now you mentioned mutated babies, and of course there's some data coming in from Japan already that there's thyroid cancer in children showing up already, mutation, gene mutation, and so forth. But one of the effects of radiation exposure is birth defects, and we have pictures of some of these I want to show to the audience. These are from Iraq, where we used depleted uranium, and the rate of birth defects has multiplied 30-fold since we attacked Iraq with 2,200 tons of depleted uranium. We attacked Afghanistan with 1,000 tons of depleted uranium. And during the Gulf War in 1991, we attacked Iraq with 350 tons. And even that amount accounted for, at the Basra hospital, they had a couple of dozen cases in 1988, before our attack, of cancer deaths. And 10 years later, in 1998, they had over 400. And the rates of birth defects such as this have increased even more.
Absolutely.
So
I think the data from Chernobyl, I mean, the birth defect, they call them jellyfish babies or whatever, it was so grotesque and so dramatic, and we're starting to see early indications here in the Northwest and in California. The numbers are so hard to get to, but you know, what numbers we're starting to see are, you know, birth defects in infants and pregnancies, and these early signs are showing up already, and it's, you know, we're 2 years. So here we go.
That would probably be the first thing you'd expect to show up.
Yes, absolutely. And thyroid, increases in thyroid cancer.
Thyroid, yeah. I read that at Fukushima they're circulating 200 tons a day of radioactive liquids, as you were saying, through these reactors.
Right.
They're burning, some of it's being blown off as steam, of course, because it's hot in there, and the rest being recycled back into the ocean. And the plumes are spreading across the Pacific, and they've detected celium, I guess, in tuna.
Well, that's the madness part about this thing. We have 300
on the California coast.
On the California coast in August of 2011, these early data comes out. And that was in August of 11 that it showed up that quickly. And then we've seen the We've seen the data coming out of Greenpeace had some buoys out 4,000 miles very early, and they were showing cesium showing up in plankton. And then the institute in Massachusetts, the WHO's Institute, had their early data showing, in their own words, thousands of times the limits in the plankton. Then, of course, we saw the fish show up, that the fishermen showed up with 2,500 times recently.
The radiation, the measurable radiation was 1,000 times normal.
Yes, and so it's completely insanity to me. I've been just sitting back waiting for these numbers, you know, for these marine biology departments, including the University of Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State. These are massive, federally funded, state taxpayer-funded marine biology departments. Where are their studies? You know, I've been going livid about it. We know, look.
Okay, this is leading into a very important topic, which is the cover-up.
Wow.
And you know, we see this in many areas. I mean, there's been a massive cover-up of the data about global overheating. There's been a huge cover-up for decades about the atrocities committed by Israel against the Palestinians. This is a cover-up that affects us all. And it has been absolutely massive. I mean, I don't remember seeing anything about Fukushima on the news since it happened.
Well, in the early days, it was widely reported, but you could see
since those early days.
Since some early days, it's been basically me going. You know, I use this intense language in my rants if people go to my YouTube site, but you know, I don't speak like that in public. I don't act like that in public. It's done intentionally to try to grab the magnitude of this, because I am so appalled. I've turned it black and yellow journalism. I think the key sign of it was Sanjay Gupta, MD's medical show on a Saturday morning, because him and Anderson Cooper, I call him Anderson Vanderbilt, were over there. And they're talking to this MIT. You could tell that they were, you know, Anderson himself was green about this, and their so-called Jim Walsh from MIT, they're saying, should we leave, should we leave? And I'm screaming, get out, get out. They did get out, and they came home. Well, exactly 2 weeks later, Sanjay Gupta, MD, which has a lot of, this is a man that was nominated to be the Surgeon General. He took the Hippocratic Oath, a neurosurgeon, great, including me. I believed in him. And so I like to watch his show, and he was on there, and 2 weeks, he comes back, and he put this woman doctor from Japan, and she talked about how radiation is not so bad. You know, she watched people die after anesthesia, and then she goes on. Then he puts this young man who claims that Chernobyl was nothing, blah, 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 nothing. And he went over there, went fishing at Lake Chernobyl, and so I put out calls on my YouTube site, find it. I got a whistleblower from CNN, by the way, who finally sent me the transcript, because they pulled it all down. I have the transcript. I've read it online multiple times.
Yeah, and Coulter was putting that out. That,
well, we expect that from, I say Ann Coulter, that dude. But we expect that from there. But from Sanjay Gupta, man who took the Hippocratic Oath?
Yeah.
So that just, my light went on how massive, as I've turned black and yellow journalism, how widespread and massive the nuclear, and I knew this, I knew that the tentacles of GE and Westinghouse and the powers there are through social engineering are the...
Well, let's talk just briefly about the companies that are involved. General Electric manufactures a great number of the reactors in this country. They produce the one at Fukushima and the one at Hanford.
Right.
And they have 31 reactors of this type, Mark I and Mark II reactors across the United States. Right. I think there's another 24 or so in Japan. Same type of reactors, same underprotected, vulnerable reactors. Now here we have the one at Hanford that's sitting on a volcanic mountain range.
Yeah.
Isn't that smart?
Same as Songs in California.
Okay, now we're looking at who isn't talking about it. The United States government isn't talking about it. The United Nations isn't talking about it.
Well, the United Nations, who's the World Health Organization, are the nuclear industry.
Okay, but I wanted to get at this. Okay. You got the World Health Organization that isn't talking about it. You have the International Atomic Energy Agency that isn't talking about it. So, of course, people just assume it isn't serious.
Yeah.
Since none of the authoritative agencies and governmental and otherwise are not talking about it. Now, this is very troubling. Why aren't they talking about it? Well, let me pause it first of all. Since the very beginning, when the U.S. Department of Energy was formed after World War II, it was formed specifically for the purpose of dividing up the nuclear package between military and commercial uses. And the military needs it for our weapons of mass destruction, so that we can pollute the Middle East and anywhere else we want to go with depleted uranium, which actually has a half-life of I think 4 billion years, which is going to last longer than the planet lasts. So there's this unholy alliance between the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. And to this day, here's another slide I want to show. To this day, the U.S. Department of Energy seems to consider itself the U.S. Department of Nuclear Energy. And if you look at this graph here, it shows the U.S. Department of Energy's budget for 2011 and 2012. And if you notice here, this is expenditures on nuclear programs alone. And this includes nuclear cleanup, nuclear security, nuclear non-proliferation, etc. This represents $27 billion out of the U.S. Department of Energy's budget. Now, these down here, the audience can't read them, but you've got solar, wind, geothermal, water. All of these renewable energy technologies received $2.2 billion. So that's a 12.5 to 1 ratio of nuclear to renewable energy. So they're still acting as if they are the U.S. Department of Nuclear Energy, and they work very closely with the nuclear energy industry. And
well, the two tell signs right now that it's still going on, even though, and we've said this whole madness going on, as Lonnie and I have both said, to send President Obama and Biden and our representatives a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. They represent the very thing. Barack Obama's mother was a downwinder. She died very young of cancer as the 300 open-air tests in Nevada. That's why Utah, we have so much cancer there. But who have we named as the new, who has Obama picked for the head of the EPA and the Department of Energy? The new nominee, I hope to go to Washington to protest he is the nuclear point man who's been hired. I mean, they're blatant right in your face, tell you this, to build the plant in Ohio. That's his entire life, is to build the nuclear plant.
Give the audience his name.
And I don't have his name in detail, but it's almost, his last name sounds almost like Moxie. I mean, he's got that crazy hair too. But Gina McCarthy has been named as the head of the EPA. Now, Gina McCarthy, it needs to be said right here in Oregon and in the Northwest, RadNet. When Fukushima happened, now what is RadNet? RadNet was really bolstered after the Patriot Act and after 9/11 as a radiation detecting web along the United States everywhere. The detections, with a wink and a nod, somehow when Fukushima, RadNet did not work. Gina McCarthy was head of RadNet. And so I think it's our opportunity to expose some of these maniacs at our confirmation hearings, because people are going to say, well, Vitter's on that committee.
So RadNet, so the audience can remember it, probably stands for Radiation Detection Network.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, it just magically failed after Fukushima. Suddenly there's no readings available.
So we relied on freelance Geiger counters, which I organized, and a lot of us organized. A lot of YouTubers, we organized early. And so the data's there, and we know the data is staggering. So we know on day about 12-14, Gregory Jacko, who was head of the NRC, who was basically placed there just by a gift to Harry Reid to block Yucca Mountain, which I think Gregory Jacko had a lot of integrity. I'm a big fan of his, and he was there. I think he's the only man that stood up to this. He was called to the Situation Room. We know this. When he went in the Situation Room, he came out. Look at those photographs of him. He was appalled, and he went to the Hill, and you could watch those confirmation, or those hearings, and he was just like, I want no part of this, and he resigned. He wanted out. So now we've placed Allison McFarland, who's a geologist who I know, who I had great hope for. She wrote a book, There's an Ancient River Under Yucca Mountain, which she's probably right, to block Yucca Mountain to get Harry Reid reelected. And
I assume much of the audience understands this, that Harry Reid's the Senate Majority Leader, who happens to be the senator from Nevada, who of course has been very successful at blocking Yucca Mountain as a nuclear waste depository.
They don't want it in Nevada, and I don't blame them. But we here in Utah, where I live, people don't realize the dump site is there in Utah.
Yeah. Now, David Biello, who's the online editor of Scientific American, he said that it's practically impossible to get the data. And if Scientific American can't get hold of the data, I don't know who can. It's all being very closely held and under the auspices of national security. You see, because the Department of Defense is so locked in to the whole nuclear energy industry, they refuse to release data on those grounds. And the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is kind of the trade organization from the commercial nuclear industry, they represent 350 companies. And they obviously have enormous lobbying power. Plus, you have the Department of Defense. So that sounds like a pretty impenetrable information lockdown.
Well, I use the line out of the Battle of Chernobyl, that award-winning documentary done in 2006. How do people in America not know about Chernobyl? The IE spent billions of dollars in a propaganda war, and she says in that beautiful line, I think it's the greatest line I've ever heard spoken on this thesis, she says the worst thing to come out of that meltdown reactor at Chernobyl was not cesium, was not plutonium, it was lies. It set the table. I mean, we had massive marches, anti-nuclear, everything. By the way, Gorbachev's wife, Riza, died of exactly what I have. 560,000 men entombed Chernobyl. How do we not know this story? The greatest construction project in world history. How do we not know this story? The IAEA propaganda machine. That's why we not know it. They spent billions. This is the greatest 1% cash cow, and they make so much money off these things with no outlay. And so we have this conspiratorial thesis, which I don't even call a conspiracy. I call it, a monopoly, or, we playing checkers or we playing chess. They're playing Monopoly, and it's Monopoly on Balco. And they've had a long time and a lot of fingers and a lot of power in order to orchestrate this. And they have their tentacles and they have their finger in every single, they have left no I undotted and no T crossed. And they've had a long time to do it.
Now, why don't you talk a little bit there about the company which is vested with the responsibility for cleaning up Fukushima, which is named TEPCO, and maybe their connection with Bechtel, which has the contract to clean up Hanford, which hasn't been done in 20 years.
Well, those whole dog and pony show orchestrated what corporate America's evolved into is, so-called corporate board members. Bechtel is Westinghouse. Westinghouse is General Electric. They are TEPCO.
They share board members. Yes.
They're the same group of people. Really, TEPCO is General Electric. They really are. They're Westinghouse. Now, I want people to be clear about this one. Hillary Clinton's last responsible duty as Secretary of the State, do you know what it was? And it's right there in plain sight. She went to Czechoslovakia, and the Russian firm that's getting contracts to build nuclear reactors in India and China. She put pressure in a public statement to put pressure on the president of Czechoslovakia to get rid of that contract, which is already signed, and give it to Westinghouse. And she uses Westinghouse in detail. That is the kind of power these people willed. They are our government. They have members placed in every government in the world. Hanford is an extension of TEPCO. They're the same group of people, and they don't do anything. They dump everything on the back. I say nuclear energy is like an old broke-down car that you're driving along, and these guys are just going to park it on the side of the curb when they're done with it, and say there's no boneyard to stick it in, but they're going to stick it to the American. Well, Hanford proves that.
Well, yeah, one of the things I read about Fukushima, the first 3 reactors are leaching into the soil and the groundwater. Once it hits the groundwater, it can create these explosions, steam explosions. It's projecting this all up into the atmosphere as well. And so the only fix, apparently, potential fix or partial fix or efforted fix, is to build concrete containment structures around it.
Not even concrete because it is not. Of course, we've talked about it. There was a solution in the early days. We call it the egg. We call it the bladder system. We have the technology. That's crazy to put a bladder system so the water can be poured on and it can all be regurgitated. But we're not going to spend one time.
TEPCO refused to do that because of the cost.
Exactly.
And they didn't even start looking at it until late last year. And similarly, as this whole filter system, which was identified 40 years ago as
by the whistleblowers,
a necessity for these Mark I and Mark II reactors, which we have at Hanford.
Right.
And Hanford has never installed one of these.
No. Hanford is a major disaster ongoing.
So it seems as if this industry really consists of a whole cabal of suicidal human beings.
They're maniacs.
Who are going to take all the rest of us with them.
They are the evil. I've brought it down in my mind over and over. Who are these? Thomas Ackerman, the artist who I work with, who I use that, Fukushima, as he says they're a bunch of unloved children who have an evil freaking, they're addicted to power to some epic proportion, who they just, I don't know what kind of chip they have, but, it's going to kill them. And I don't think that, I think they're so arrogant, I think they're above it, and people say, well, they have the money to save themselves. I'm in the #1 leukemia unit on Earth. And I'm telling you, even our survival rate there is very low. And I tell you, if you think that money can save you, tell that to Steve Jobs. He was one of maybe the richest people, one of the richest people on the face of Earth. They couldn't save him. So the very people, that's what we say, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you support the industry, it's going to kill them, but they don't care. I think they're so arrogant and above it. They're just, as you say, a cabal of pure epic evil. And this is the most catastrophic thing that I think that has ever happened in the history of mankind. I really do. We're going to take the greatest food basket in the history of the world, and how do we temporize and think that the Pacific Ocean is somehow a bathtub? It's not a bathtub, it has rivers in it. We know that contamination off the Japanese current, into the California current, into the Gulf of Alaska, up the coasts of Oregon. We know how quickly water can travel from here to there.
We know how long it took that pier to end up on an Oregon beach, And it didn't take that long, Currents travel fast.
Yes, there are rivers in there. So where are the data? Where is the data? And I tell everybody, you have no social code. And people are afraid, I think, in marine biology departments. I have whistleblowers who've been sending me. I have ties with some of the major ones here. I had a lot of whistleblowers early because I was the only one reporting this. And I have preliminary data, but I think they're waiting for one to blink. I think they're afraid of this cabal. And I think they really are the first one to put, because that's going to be a huge story. Well, at the end of Helen Caldicott's incredible, amazing symposium, when her beautiful science beyond nuclear's presentation was incredible. At the end, the doctor from Stanford, Dr. Abrams, at the end, he said, and his credibility is impeccable. He's a very old man. He said, my friends, private marine biology aquariums in Monterey Bay, his cage tuna have cesium. He said that. I on there fell right there. That's all I need. If they have cesium in Monterey, they have cesium here. They have cesium all up and down the coast, in the Gulf, and they have plutonium. You don't get one with the other. And if that's the case, and you're not going to run a Geiger counter over a fish and be able to detect this, it has to be into the tuna. So, and our food inspection process here, this is a fact. Within days after Fukushima, in this ridiculous debate we had over one drone or one bomb on our budget, within days it came down, and I'm the one that termed, these guys want to kill Bert and Ernie. That was my term at the early days, and I'm like, they needed a sacrificial lamb, and for the left to go along with the right. And the sacrificial lamb came down to two things. It came down to killing Bert and Ernie, pulling the plug on PBS. We're talking $10 million, or pulling some money out of the food inspection. At the time of Chernobyl, and they sacrificial lamb the food inspection fish. And just days after Fukushima, it is the most blatant, grotesque metaphor to who we are. Yes. The price of one bomb.
And food inspection is already severely shortchanged the American public. Like, for example, with meat, I think that the FDA inspects 5%, I think, of American meat. And in Japan, they inspect 100%.
Well, I think it's ironic that the Japanese fishermen are the ones who blocked the northern cod going into the Manhattan, New York restaurants. It was getting there. And the Japanese Northern Fishermen Alliance, a group of them, they're the ones that blocked it. And I think people need to know this too. People somehow think there's no protests in Japan. The biggest protests maybe in the history of mankind are going on in Japan. And look at the media block out that. Massive, giant. There are people, handcuffing themselves. There's litigation going. They are pressing hard for these people to go to prison or jail. That's how On April 4th, I gave this radical rant that they're dumping plutonium into the Pacific Ocean. I listened to the hearings. By law, they forced them to, one paragraph, they were dumping plutonium that exact day, which is the irony of it. And so, but who's stopping them? Who stepped into the Japanese government, the people? The IAEA. You know, Kissinger himself went over there. You know, this cabal of evil has gone over there, and they're arresting people for reporting anything out of here. If you report anything, I used to get hundreds of emails a day out of Japan. Huge viewership out of Japan. I was the only ones that were getting there. Kathy Iwan can confirm this. She was over there. She's an activist in San Diego now. She was trapped over there, and she says the only reports I was getting was from you, Kevin. And so, if you are reporting out of there, they've passed laws now. It blows my mind how repressive this has become. They're arresting people for reporting anything on the children's thyroids, any information. They are smashing
And despite
down.
these hundreds of thousands of protesters, they're reopening their nuclear sites.
Only two. And that's subliminal. Nuclear's done over there. And, you know, again, I think, and nuclear's done in Germany. That's the thing that kills me about this, is we're not having these arguments in 1971. You know, Germany did it, and people don't realize, and are doing it. Germany had one of the most advanced nuclear energy programs in the world. They were in the middle of building the biggest, most technically advanced. And it was the Christian women and the Green Party got a little power. They were going and laying their bodies on the railroad tracks when they're bringing uranium. They put a stop to it, and they've done it. And I worked as an economist. I worked with some of the Japanese economists. The IA tells us, it takes $2 billion to decommission a plant. Well, let's see how much did it cost Germany to decommission that? Peanuts compared to that. Peanuts compared to that. And we have the solar technology. The solar technology exists. The knock on solar technology has always been, when the sun's down, it cannot store the energy. Well, it can store the energy now.
Well, we have, there is that. There is also, of course, geothermal. In fact, the Indonesian national oil company has since they're running out of oil, they're gone to geothermal, and it's transferable technology. Probably much the same kind of drilling technology for geothermal.
Well, the
there's tidal.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's tidal energy, there's wave energy, there's lots of energy sources. We don't need nuclear, and we don't need we don't need fossil fuels. That's why I developed that sign that was shown at the beginning of the program.
I love it.
You know,
I love that sign.
That reads, "What does the suns leave upon the sun?" And that refers to nuclear energy. That's the only place that nuclear energy is safe for human beings is on the sun. And even an average distance of 93 million miles away, it still causes skin cancer, you know? Okay, and what is the Earth leaving the Earth? And that refers to all the fossil remains of former life forms on this planet. Leave them there, leave them alone.
Well, one thing I want to say as far as your chart goes, and he said it so well, Helen Caldecott, if there was no subsidies whatsoever and no money was put towards it, and it was an equal playing field, there would be no nuclear. Nuclear is not cheap, and I think people need to understand this, because we've been sold this bill of goods that nuclear does not release carbons into the atmosphere. They release much more carbons than coal, because we have to enrich the uranium, and not only that, to mine the uranium. The carbon footprint off nuclear is many times coal, many. It's dirty, and it's not cheap.
And there have been no new nuclear plants, I think, built in 20 years or so, because
30.
it's it's extremely expensive.
Till now, it's going on now in Georgia. There's 200
It's extremely
construction.
expensive, and they can't get any private investors because the liability is too great. And they can't get insurance because the liability is too great.
Well, they've backdoored all that. They have laws, like in our state right now, they're trying to build Blue Castle on the Green River. I knew Walt Stegner personally. He would roll over in his grave. I call it the Green Devil. And we have Dirty Herbie, the worst governor in history, who signed off bringing, and a lot of Americans don't know this, in Utah, we've had governor veto after veto, because we have an insane legislative process there, one-party politics. But we've always had responsible governors, and John Huntsman, and we've always vetoed the European waste coming into the West dump site. Our governor's approved it now. So not only we got ours here, and just sitting off there, we're going to start taking all of Europe's that Italy's been kicking the can on their waste for decades and they know where to put it.
And France has got more than anybody.
Even the polls are starting to change in France. The activism is working grassroots in France. I think in a very short time you're going to see France do as Germany and completely turn. Germany showed the playbook that the IA are nothing but liars. And I think it needs to be said about Chernobyl that the life expectancy pre-Chernobyl and life expectancy after Chernobyl. And I'm not just talking in Belarus and the Ukraine. There was a little girl, I mean, I have AML leukemia. I was given 2 months to live after I ran on October 13. Intense, hardcore treatment. There was a little girl from the Ukraine who I got to be very good friends who died while I was in there, 26 years old. The death is rampant over there. The life expectancy has been lowered dramatically. And not there, spreading over Europe too. That was so downplayed, and Fukushima is many, many, many times Chernobyl. Just because we pushed it in the Pacific, it doesn't matter if it's in that ecosystem or in the air ecosystem. It's in the ecosystem. And we all live on this, you know, I say this is the we of all, the jet stream. We're all connected.
And the meltdown was 6 times Chernobyl's approximately. And
at least 6 times. It's probably much more than that because of the moxide fuel in number 4 and what's been released into the atmosphere. But at least 6 times. And we're talking, it was entombed after 87 days. The biggest construction project in world history. And look at the men of Chernobyl. Watch the documentary, that award-winning, The Battle for Chernobyl. You know, how many of them are already dead? Talk about mutated jellyfish babies over there still to this day. And Fukushima, 733 days and counting, and it doesn't get weaker. The poison that's being dumped in the Pacific is stronger today than it was on day 1. It's stronger today than it was yesterday. It is a process. This is nuclear fission, gamma rays, and no scientist knows. We hear this contemporarized word China syndrome burning into, well, it's all hypothesized. No one knows what's going to happen. As it's burning deeper and deeper, is that word, you know, China syndrome, which geographically was inaccurate, it'd be Australia. But who knows? But something's got to give. Now, whether it will kick out the side and fuse into the ocean, you know, like a volcano in Hawaii, or if it will steam up through the... But I guess we'll find out. I guess we're going to find out. TEPCO's own words. They're saying 40 years, which they just make up stuff. Yep. You know, they were shoving newspaper in cracks in the early days, dumping with helicopters. The IE is just a lie, and by law, in the United States, this is crimes against humanity. These people have names and addresses, and people need to identify them. You know, go to their front lawn and call them out. Say, hey, what are you doing to us?
Well, that's why I mentioned the names of the companies involved, because they have stockholders.
Well, not even stockholders. They have board of directors, and these board of directors, as the only true word Mitt Romney ever said, corporations are people. They are people. Yeah. And they have names and addresses.
I mean, the stockholders can potentially bring pressure to bear on the companies.
Well, the problem with the stockholders...
And then you have divestment.
Yeah, you have the 401k fairy tale, so you're so diluted within shareholders. In the old days, you used to have one major shareholder or a few that could organize and vote these monsters out. 401ks have diluted that so deeply that...
Well, I think people are going to want to know something that they can do.
Yes, and there are things that you can do.
And I think divestment is a powerful tool.
Yes, there's lots of things that people can do.
If major funds can be motivated to divest from these criminal companies. Now, our senior senator, Ron Wyden, is the incoming chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So he is in probably the most powerful position in the Senate to
I was a huge fan of his in the early days. He went over to Fukushima. He really was, he was the only guy that took this on. But
yeah, but he went to Fukushima. This is important, though. He did go to Fukushima, and he came back and he reported to Congress. And he reported that it was a lot worse than he'd thought.
Right.
Now, I don't know where it's gone from there.
He's done nothing. He's dropped the ball. They dummied him down. They fear-mongered. I don't know what they...
But anyway, the point is we are constituents. And we citizens of Oregon have standing to bring pressure to bear on Senator Wyden.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's one thing I would like to alert the audience about doing. And public pressure can help. I mean, I have a recent experience with this. I've been protesting against the activities up in Hanford for some time. And most recently, there was a hearing by the Washington Department of Ecology regarding they're poised to issue another hazardous waste permit to the Department of Energy to bring nuclear waste from all over the United States and dump it up at Hanford. The previous one I protested about was the Global Nuclear Energy Partnership. Let's build nuclear reactors in all the third world countries that are clamoring for energy. Then we'll provide them the nuclear fuel, and they can all bring it back here for recycling. Of course, they have no idea how to recycle it. They have no idea how to vitrify it. It's just, I think it's just, keeping a lot of people employed talking about it. But anyway, what happened was they had over the public comment period is 6 months, and it ended last October. Okay, they just recently released a statement that, wow, public comments were pretty insightful, and the public had a lot of pretty good ideas, and they raised a lot of issues, and so we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and kind of rethink this whole thing. And if we do issue this permit, it's not going to be for 2 years or so. So what I'm saying is the public can have an impact, at least kicking the can down the road and delaying and putting it off. And if it's put off in ways that cause increased expense for the private contractors, we can put them out of business potentially. The same thing happened with the coal trains recently. We've been objecting to the coal trains coming through Eugene. Well, we just learned that 2 of the 3 partners in this project have pulled out and decided they're not going to participate in the coal train project at Coos Bay. So we need citizens to wake up and take their citizenship duty seriously, and showing up every 2 years to vote for what the Mexicans are smart enough to call in their system, the PAN and the PRI, they call it 2 heads of the same serpent. Yeah. And that's the Democrats and the Republicans. And nobody's going to do anything unless they're pushed from below, and they're pushed very vigorously and relentlessly and decisively from below.
There's no longer right, there's only popular opinion. We do have, and there's a lot of very smart, bright people out there. That's my whole mantra, is post-ignorance. If people know these things and know where they can go to work at this, there's a lot of brilliant people. I've learned about my YouTube vlog and my socioeconomic PhD and this whole mantra of mine through my YouTube site. I've learned there are incredible, brilliant people out there. Mm-hmm. This country has a lot of bright, strong people. They've been repressed and mashed down. They need to, and just like you said, Barbara Boxer is the head of the committee on the EPA. All you people in Southern California, you live on this current. Put the pressure on her.
She and Bernie Sanders have now introduced legislation regarding global warming.
And Markey's been involved too.
Yeah, but what we need, we got more smart people than we have brave people. And I tell everybody, and I offend people when I say this, but I says internationally, when people start flying into the United States airports, we need to put these giant signs up and hold them up and say, "Welcome to America, home of the cowards," because we've turned into cowards. But you have to fight this in an intelligent way. I rant and rave and carry on, but I know my subject matter. I used to say I eat, sleep, drink this, which I have my whole life. Now I sleep with it, literally. I have this monster in my body. I'm fighting for my life every day. Yeah. That's what I'm up to. I mean, my chances of living today, right now, are only 50-50. Well, you're also fighting for everybody else's life right now.
I love people, and I love the people of Oregon. I want people to know this. I may go off and be sounded tense. I love Eugene. I think this place is where it's going to happen. The Soldier I love people. I love life. I love people, and I love life.
You don't want to give it up.
No, I don't want to give it up. I love this beautiful geography. I love it. I could just go out and look at things where I live in that beautiful Utah. In Oregon. I can go for a walk. I love to walk, by the way. And I want to say this too in Eugene. Clean up the Mill Creek there. Clean it up. I went for a walk over there. You guys are green. You're socially conscious. I raised a lot of stink about that 2 days ago. I went over there and I shot some videos, and I'm going to expose it. And I went over to the Parks Department. They kicked me to this place and kicked me to that place and kicked me to this. Let's quit talking about things and let's start doing things. Let's put the pressure on these guys.
You think it's bad just in a little community like Eugene. Think about how it's like in Washington.
Yes. Oh, it's a cesspool. It's a cesspool of humanity. You use the right term, a cabal. Boy, is it. And Thomas Ackerman, I love him. We're artists. We're a group of artists that are doing this. This is my whole post-ignorance. He says it. He says it's a bunch of, oligarchs with children that were unloved, with children. It's a chain of unloved oligarchs who got some kind of evil.
Well, it's interesting that he would invoke that causality, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what is involved typically in the backgrounds of people who are self-identified conservatives. There is the authoritarian personality does come from emotional deprivation in childhood and authoritarian upbringing and so forth.
Study after study after study has proven it.
And it's cross-cultural. I mean,
it is cross-cultural.
Yeah.
And both sides, you know, it's become, you know, neo. Come on, let's get contemporized here. And that's what I'm up to. I'm trying to contemporize the truth of nuclear fallout and death.
I want to talk a little bit about Hanford, since that is our local issue. And the Columbia Generating Station at Hanford is the last nuclear plant in the Northwest. And as I've said, it's a Mark II. It's the same technology that collapsed at Fukushima, and they have 177 underground pits that this nuclear waste is buried in. It's the most contaminated nuclear site in the Western world. And they keep talking about bringing more and more and more in. This recent proposal was to dig trenches for 40 miles that are like, I don't know, 50, maybe 50, as much as 50 feet deep, to dump all this junk in. It's incredible. I mean, that's a distance from Portland to Salem.
It's insanity. And Hanford has been a major catastrophe for so long. I remember when I first got in this fight via, you know, everybody in Utah knew what a downwinter, and Walt Stegner mentored me there, and we were all in this fight. Clear back then, the first word that would come up was Hanford. And we're still having that conversation. And they promised us, oh, technology will catch up. Well, Einstein, Sakharov, Oppenheimer, all of them said that this was going to happen, and there is no thing. There is no solution. Science will never catch up.
When I went up to testify in Hanford in 2007, that's 6 years ago, I talked to a nuclear scientist up there who was consulting, and that's what he said. They have no idea how to do this vitrification. They're not anywhere close to knowing how to reprocess this stuff. And then he happened to be walking around the park out there in Richmond with the chief of the Yakima Nation. And he told me that this is all on Yakima land that is supposed to belong to them under an 1865 treaty for hunting and fishing. Anyway, I did want to also give the audience some sense of things they can do.
Yeah, and there are things.
So one thing they can do is to monitor what's going on in the state of Washington, because the state of Washington has to issue a permit before the DOE can dump more stuff at Hanford. And so there's a website that I hope will be put on the screen about the Department of Ecology at Hanford. Larry, you want to get that up on the screen? So,
I would just say, live like you have cancer before you get cancer.
it's there. The other one is the Heart of America Northwest, which is a website that monitors the federal activities at Hanford, and those are two good websites to monitor what's going on and put your 2 cents worth in and attend meetings, to testify, to protest, to gather information, and really keep at it. So, Kevin, it's been a delight. You know, it was a
thank you
wonderful
so much.
topic.
I loved it.
You know, and
your knowledge is impeccable, Jack.
and thank you very much for your visit to Eugene.
I love Eugene. I love the people
bringing
of
good
Oregon.
news, but
Well, it's a magnificent place. It's very socially conscious, and I love that about the people of Eugene. I mean, it's something that we could all take a page out of.
With our backs were we better than